Um, Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar for the launch of the landscape report that looks at the Concordat for environmental sustainability in research and innovation practice. My name is Susan Simon. I'm the director for the UKI Environmental Sustainability Programme, but I'm standing in here for our chair of the Concordat Oversight Group, Professor Krasimira Tsaneva Asanazova. I'm very sorry about the pronunciation, it's quite difficult, but she is the Vice President and Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research and Impact at the University at Exeter, and she is chairing the Concordat Oversight Group. So you have to put up with me, I'm afraid. She couldn't attend today. The Concordat Oversight Group itself is formed of representatives of the UK research community, namely universities, independent institutes, funders, as well as representation from research technicians and early career researchers. And I'm delighted to welcome members of this group for this webinar, joining this meeting as panelists, who will introduce themselves. If you would like to step forward, I think that would be Matthew in the first. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, and I should introduce myself. My name is Matthew Grenby. I'm a professor in the School of English at Newcastle University, but for the purposes of this, I'm Pro Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation at Newcastle. Do you need any more, or shall I pass the mic to the next person?
That's fine. We'll go to Lydia.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Lydia Cole. I'm a lecturer based at the University of St Andrews up in Scotland. I don't have a role like Matthew does, governing in the university, but I am very active in thinking about the operational side of sustainability as well as teaching and research at the university. Thank you.
Fabulous. And then we come to Andrew. Is he here? No? And we go to Simon.
Okay, pleased to meet you all. Simon Breeden. I'm Associate Lead of the Technician Commitment and based in the UK Institute for Technical Skills and Strategy. And much like Lydia, very much looking at, the operational aspects of environmental sustainability and how we can encourage behaviours to minimise the impact. So thanks very much and great to see you all.
Fabulous. So we are here to launch the Concordat Landscape Report. The Concordat for the environment, I can't ever get this out properly, the environmental sustainability of research and innovation practice. So in the future for the meeting, I will just call it Concordat, it's too long, is aiming to move the entire sector jointly forward to reduce the detrimental impact of research activities on our environment. And since its launch, we have seen most of the UK higher education institutions, independent institutes, funders, as well as organizations such as Simon Braden's representation of the technicians and NHS making the commitment to drive the 6 priorities that are agreed in the Concordat. The oversight group itself aims to monitor the developments and the effectiveness of this agreement, identify hurdles and or consider what we might need to do to move things forward. And as a science community, we do believe in facts and figures. So establishing from where we are starting is actually critical for measuring the impact of the Concordat. So the landscape report is exactly doing that, and it's taking a snapshot in time to understand how far we have come when we look back in the future. The report was produced by Joe Allett, who's here as well, in UKI on behalf of the Oversight Board or Oversight Group, and the group overall advised both on the scope and the final document. And after discussion and representation, we signed it off as in the last oversight meeting. So we're all very invested in the report, but I wanted to point out there's an enormous amount of work that Joe has put in there with colleagues. I think there's been quite a bit of help from others as well. So I just wanted to highlight that. But the report is only just gone public today. So I suspect not everybody of you had a chance to read it through. And so we thought it might be helpful if Joe can talk you through the sort of key elements and findings before we open a question and answer session with the panel members. Joe, if I can hand over to you.
Sure. Let me just put some slides up. Okay, so as I say, as Susan said, the report came out literally today. We will make sure that a link is put into the chat if you haven't already received it. We thought we'd just do a couple of slides just to tell you what's in the report. So in general, it reviews looking across the research and innovation sector, and it focuses on 3 key parts of the sector, but it does acknowledge that there are other parts to the sector. So it's got a focus on higher education institutes, which is a lot of our universities, research organisations, but also funding organisations. And it looks across sustainability league tables, accreditation schemes in various different parts of the research and innovation sector, but also looking at reporting frameworks, both mandatory and voluntary frameworks that have a look at sustainability. And it looks at various different data that we have researched by going into different organisations' websites, not just signatories, but looking across the whole sector. We did a sampling technique to select several hundred and to see what was out there and how did that address some of the Concordat priorities. And I did some gentle statistics on it just so that we can give you an idea of what we found. So generally, we found that the league tables, accreditation schemes, and reporting frameworks are very useful insight, and they can help really specific parts of the sector to help address the Concordat, particularly if you're an organisation trying to deliver the Concordat. And some of them will provide sector, sub-sector-wide insight, but probably not the whole sector, because none of it actually offers comprehensive coverage. And there's possibly some work we need to do there. Not sure if we need something that covers all of it, but it's just to be aware that there isn't a single tool to show us that. But we also found there was an opportunity for league tables and the frameworks that are out there to do a little bit more to capture what's being done actually specifically on sustainable research practice. And there's some recommendations in the report, particularly how we can enhance data collection on sustainable research practice, working with the owners of league tables, for instance. And we've already made some contact with People and Planet who seem keen to have a chat with us. And for future reporting, we've also made recommendations of the sort of things that we should keep an eye on. And of course, there are new tools coming out all the time, and those are things that we would want to monitor as well as new policies that have come in. It's worth noting the report is not trying to say how successful the Concordat has been to date. It is literally just telling us what does the sector look like right now, so that we've got something to look back on. We hope to do another report to show us how well we're doing or how well we're not doing. So let's stop there and just highlight, I don't know if Jenny's working on this, there seems to be quite a number of people who can't get into the webinar, who are stuck on the outside of a digital frame. Jenny, are we able to let them in somehow?
Yeah, I'm trying to get that sorted. So we did have the license to have more than 100 people come in. So we're just trying to sort it back to let everyone in.
Okay, right. We'll carry on and hopefully we can have more people join us shortly. Back to you, Susan.
And there I was thinking that was pure luck that we ended up with 100 people. So there you go. Anyway, thank you so much, Joe. That's really sets us nicely up for this session. And to start us all up, I would just like to throw a question to each of the panel members to spend maybe 2 minutes to reflect on this. So my question is, what impacts? No, sorry, I'm wrong here. I think you are all giving your reflection for 2 minutes of the landscape report, the Concordat, or both. Sorry, I'll hand over to Lydia. I messed up already, didn't I? Sorry. You go, Lydia.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you. And congratulations to Joe again and colleagues for putting together what is really a huge effort to help us to understand what is going on already across those different sectors that Joe mentioned. So I'll reflect briefly on the Concordat and the landscape report from my position within the higher education sector. And as I mentioned before, as somebody who teaches and does research on sustainability related matters within a School of Geography and Sustainable Development, but also from the sort of operational side of things, which I've been trying to work on within the school that I sit in, but also work with the university to think about what we can work on within our university setting. And each university has a different geographical and also cultural economic context, obviously. So we want to make sure that the Concordat is sort of fit for purpose across each of these different sectors and the variety of institutions within one sector. So I think the Concordat, from my perspective, provides a vision of what we can, should be working on within the higher education sector. It gives, as well as that vision, it gives an action plan then for what we should be focusing on. And I think from what I know of how things function at St Andrews, and it's probably similar across universities, I would imagine, there isn't always coherence across departments. Decisions are being made in one place that don't necessarily fit with decisions that are being made in another department. So having this vision and action plan that helps to understand who needs to be sat at which tables to help with decisions that do impact on sustainability, which are most decisions, especially those last ones, those large ones to do with infrastructure, procurement, etc. I think the Concordat provides us with a helpful framework that thinks about who needs to be in the room for some of these overarching decisions. The landscape report is an amazing baseline report, really, to help us understand what is going on across the sector. And there is so much, not all coherent. And as Joe pointed out, the different frameworks that are already in place, or guidance and or reporting, are sometimes just for one sector. But this landscape report helps us to understand where there could be maybe more coherence, where we could develop metrics and really importantly, use what is happening already in terms of data collection and reporting to help us understand more about the effectiveness of the Concordat, or not. As Joe said, we really want to understand what is working and what isn't working, and how we can support, from my case, universities. I think one thing that the oversight group and this report has thrown up is that we need more forums, or at least one place where people can share best practice, what is working and what isn't working, really importantly, so we don't keep putting the increasingly limited time and money that universities have to keep redesigning the wheel. What can we learn from each other? And I think the Concordat provides an opportunity, in part through EAUC's community of practice, which I think Susan is going to mention about later. But we want to use this as an opportunity for people to share knowledge across the sector and support each other to create practices which are more responsible and or sustainable, ideally. So thanks, Susan.
Fabulous. Simon, I'll come to you next.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Susan. Much appreciated. I guess what I'd like to do is kind of build on what Lydia said, really, and just kind of use this report to generate a great deal of interest in that sharing of good practice element of this. I guess what I would say from the report is there was a couple of things that came very clear to me. One of which was, the Facebook relationship status of it's complicated, right? In so much as it's difficult to identify what the sector is. And it's difficult to identify exactly what institutions mean by environmental sustainability, because quite often that some of the reporting can move out into social aspects of the research as well. And terminology is important. So, we've talked about sustainable research practice, and when we talk about environmental sustainable research, quite often it was referring to research actually on environmental issues, and that's not what this is focused on. So we need to unpick and get our terminology correct on that. So it's a very complex landscape, but this report has really gone to great lengths to try and understand that and to clarify. And there's some very clear recommendations for the sector at the end of that, which is incredibly useful. And I guess in particular, the one around kind of having a framework, the HESA EMR data, estates management and resource reporting framework is an important way to measure institutions, because universities both love and hate league tables at the same time. We love them when we're at the top of them and we're doing well. We're less keen on them when we're not doing so well. But what they do, and we've seen this in some of the data that Joe's managed to unpick in regards to sustainable laboratories in particular, is that we've shown that actually where you can measure something and you can engage people in kind of improving that metric, you can really change behaviors. Okay, you can change behaviors of individuals on the ground, which can then add up to a significant impact. And I guess from my position, that's really where technicians and the technical community can really help with this, is more of that on the ground behavioral change about how we do research that will then help drive the environmental sustainability going forward, which is important alongside those big projects that can then really improve environmental sustainability of the research and innovation sector. So I think we need to do both of those things, do the big kind of projects, but also change those individual behaviors as well. And this report has put together a comprehensive overview of the sector as it looks now, and which will be a useful baseline to demonstrate progress over the coming years. So thanks very much to Joe and the team for putting this together. We're very, very grateful as an oversight group, and please do get those questions flooding in for us after this. That'd be great. Thank you. Susan.
Very good reminder. Thank you, Simon. Yes, we are asking for questions. Matthew, can I ask you for your reflections on this?
Yeah, well, the first thing I absolutely have to say is to echo what colleagues have already said, which is congratulations and thank you very much for all of the work that's gone into producing this report. It looks good and it's a great starting point. Having said that, let me then be a little bit more skeptical, I suppose, and just say, when I first heard about this, and I'm kind of, for those of you who have just kind of entered this webinar, my job is Pro Vice Chancellor for Research at Newcastle University. And when I first heard about this Concordat from the Wellcome, I just thought, oh, yet another Concordat. We've got so many and they bring so much more administration, and what eventually do they achieve? That was my concern, I suppose. And so that's why I am grateful for the approach that this group has taken, that I am grateful that what we've come up with is actually at this stage quite light touch and is really about setting a benchmark so that we know across the next few years what we're going to be able to achieve. I mean, we did as an oversight group at the beginning of this process, we did consider something much more kind of active and much more I'm going to say perhaps intrusive, or much more hard work, which was to go out to every research organization and say, what are you doing on this and what are you doing on that, and give us a huge long response, and we can kind of deal with that data as an oversight group. But I think we made the right decision in saying that we need to establish this baseline before we do any of that further work, to really then work out where we're starting and then where we want to get to, what tools already exist, and why ensuring that we don't just duplicate those with similar methodologies. So I think we made the right decision, and I'm grateful to all of those who've got this landscape report, which is really, I suppose, the starting gun in some ways of a longer process. This is how I see it anyway. Perhaps I don't speak for the rest of the group, but that's how I see it. I suppose for me, the landscape report is going to be really useful because of the constituencies that I have to engage with in my role. Partly that's the research community at my university, and I think having the landscape report is a good way of being able to speak to them in a focused way. Obviously, like all universities, as the report shows, we have our missions and we have our strategies around environmental sustainability, but there's always the danger that they become a bit nebulous, that we just have them on a website and no one does anything about it. What the landscape report is going to enable us to do, I think, is to sort of say, right, we know that there is now going to be oversight of this, that we actually have a kind of some energy behind it, and that's an invitation, I suppose, to members of our research community to get involved with this and be assured that this is not just a kind of a website which we don't do anything with. Perhaps even more important than that is when I need to communicate to other constituencies, like my own executive board at my university, or even the council that runs my university. Universities are in a difficult situation at the moment. We're under all sorts of financial pressure. These are the things which are taking precedence in all of the discussions we're having. What's the future of the university going to be? And having the report, having the Concordat and having the report means that the environmental sustainability remains pretty much at the top of the agenda. So alongside all of the other discussions I'm having with the executive board or with our council, the idea that there is this external monitoring and that we are going to be looking at this ensures that it can be remaining a priority. And I suppose just allied with that, the final thing I'd say, I don't know if it's the final thing, but one other thing I'd say is that it's really useful to have this particular Concordat focusing particularly on research and innovation, because so much of what we're doing around environmental sustainability in the university is across the piece. It's across estates, it's across procurement, and those are the kinds of areas where traditionally we've been focusing on, because that's where we as a university know we can make a difference acting on our own. But that means that sometimes research gets lost in this discussion, and that's why I think it's important to have the Concordat and the report to make sure that research, environmental sustainability of research and innovation is at the forefront. So, do I want to say anything else? Well, perhaps I'll just say just one or two other things. I talked about how you can use the report in my university and hopefully in many other universities to try and encourage people to kind of to get on board with the Concordat and make some positive change. And I suppose the report is a good starting gun for making me think about what we can do to get our colleagues to engage. And one of the things we're doing at Newcastle, for instance, is now we want to put in place a toolkit to help colleagues respond to the Concordat when they're making funding applications, for instance, or so that they can help to manage all of the reporting requirements of the Concordat. The landscape report means that we can now know that this is a priority. That's something I need to do in order to get our community involved and to help them. And we can ask our community a little bit more about what they want to have in that toolkit to help them. And I suppose it's also, and Lydia and Simon, you both spoke about this. Last thing I'll say, fundamentally, the Concordat and the report is a really good springboard for spreading good practice. I have heard anecdotally about all sorts of brilliant things that are going on at other institutions, and I want to know what they are, and I want to know whether they work. You mentioned Susan at the beginning that Krazi, who's my equivalent at Exeter, she's chairing this group. She's not here today, but I know that at Exeter they've developed some really great tools to look at how we can evaluate the environmental sustainability of any research project from beginning to end. I want to know how that works, whether it works, whether we can do it at my university, whether we have to buy it in or whether I have to develop our own. And this forum, this landscape report is, as I say, a really good sort of starting point for allowing us to share that good practice and making sure that we're having a sector-wide approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. And I'm pleased to say that Andrew has now joined us. He was behind the paywall or whatever it was. So, Andrew, I give you 5 minutes to introduce yourself and maybe reflect a little bit on both the Concordat and the landscape report, or either of them, and what that means for you as a representative of funders.
Thank you very much. Isn't it great that there's such interest in these topics that we overwhelm the limits on participants? So, of all the reasons I could have been delayed joining, I think that's one of the very best ones. So, I'm Andrew Clark. I'm Executive Director Product at the Royal Academy of Engineering, meaning I look after the various things we do in research and innovation funding. We're the UK's National Academy for Engineering and Technology, with a mission to engineer better lives. And realistically, in engineering, we always have to take on the fact that sustainability is a huge goal for us, but as a profession, as a community, we've not always done what is best for sustainability. And a lot of the challenges the world's faced come down to poor engineering decisions that have been made in the past. And so doing what we can to rectify that, to address the challenges in a well-evidenced and appropriate way is very, very important for us across everything we do, including the research innovation activities. On the other hand, as a relatively small funder, our overall budget is around £50 million per year. We're very, very conscious of the limitations on what we can do, the influence we can actually have on the sector as a whole if we introduce a policy. And that's why it's so good to be part of something like the Concordat or like the landscape report. We can see ourselves as part of this much wider movement of funders, of organizations, of individuals who are trying to do what we can to improve the sustainability of research innovation for the long term in this very complicated picture. And it's a matter of, we all know that the reality for research innovation organizations, particularly universities, is by no means straightforward at the moment. There are a lot of challenges, a lot of complexity. And it is very, very helpful to have, as others have talked about, this sense of what does good look like? What are the shared commitments? And how are we all supporting each other in making progress on that journey? Where are the examples of what other people are doing? Helps us assess ourselves, helps us see what further we might do. And the same thing applies exactly to funders. We sort of all have, there's always been a little bit of comparing notes of what we're all doing, addressing this and how we might tweak funding conditions, adjust expectations in grants to make sure that we respond to gender. The Concordat helps us make that all a little bit clearer, share the data. And then the landscape report, very, very helpful in providing that sort of baseline of here is what the current good practice looks like, the current metrics, and here's some very useful suggestions on what we do better. So it's, just as others have said, it's very grateful to those who've made the work in getting us thus far, very interested in learning what others are doing across the sector, but very conscious that this is a long-term challenge. This represents, a starting gun or a mile, maybe a first step along a very, very long and difficult journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. And very good point. One of the things I noticed is that in the sector, there's lots of things going on now, not always visible, especially, these discussion amongst funders to trying to align things and make it less problematic. So thank you for bringing that up. But I think that's also a good point that the landscape review is starting to bring this all more out so that people actually see all these things that are going on. So to start us off with the questions, now that's the right time to say that, I wonder whether the panel members have already seen any changes that the Concordat is driving in terms of your organization or the community you're engaging with. Have you seen a difference already? So, Simon, you've got the hand up.
Okay, so I clearly don't like silences, so I thought I would start the ball rolling, as it were. So apologies for that. I guess what I would say, just in terms of the impact on the technical community, that the Concordat and the landscape report will have, is really, I guess, it's about generating that awareness and also generating a community of practice in this area as well, in so much as over the last 12 months or so, the Institute for Technical Skills and Strategy, where I'm based, we've We've done a couple of taken a couple of actions that I think will really help solidify the work we're doing in this area. We've launched our own report, which is much more operational in the way that it's constructed, about that sharing of just 10 examples of good practice in this area. What does, good environmental sustainable research look like for technicians? And so we've published that, and so if you have a look, you'll be able to find it. But we've also launched a network, an environmental sustainability network as well, to once again act as that forum for sharing of good practice. Because, in the oversight report, the landscape report, it's identified that there were 2,900 labs were registered through the various accreditation schemes across the sector. And we have way more than 2,900 labs across the sector, way more orders of magnitude. And so, once again, if we can share that good practice, then I think what we'll be able to do is have some real impact. So I guess for me, the impact that this Concordat and the area has had is really just awareness raising and generation of community and that sharing of knowledge. So thank you.
You. Anybody else? Matthew.
Yeah. So I can talk from a more of a kind of, I suppose, just from a practical dimension about what the Concordat has made us do as an institution. I imagine we're pretty typical here at Newcastle, but this is what we've done. We took all of the 6 steps which are identified in the Concordat, and we developed an action plan around them. So, obviously we had a strategy and we had an action plan before that, but having the Concordat there means that it's set out these 6 steps and we've developed an action plan and we will address each one of those. And that is, I'm looking at on the other side of my screen at the moment, our action plan around all of those things: leadership and system change, sustainable infrastructure, sustainable procurement, emissions from business and academic travel, collaborations and partnership, and environmental impact and reporting data. Those are all, it's great to have that broken up, and we now know we have a template to go down and make sure we're addressing all of those issues. I could go through all 6 of them and tell you what we're doing, but I won't. Maybe I'll just concentrate on a couple of them. One of them is around sustainable infrastructure and leaf labs, leaf accreditation. I mean, welcome. It's good to have a stick sometimes, and welcome are brandishing that stick. They tell us that if we want to have any welcome funding, we need to have a minimum of bronze accreditation for our leaf labs. And so we're going to go and do that. We put in place Many of our labs, of course, have LEAF accreditation at the moment, but this is focusing the mind. We will go out and make sure we have a strong process to encourage colleagues to do this, partly because it's what they should be doing, and partly because the welcome is in the background telling us that we need to do that. And where the welcome leads, other funders are following. So, this is that probably would have happened, but would it have happened so quickly without the Concordat? I don't know. Or take the other really big thorny issue for me, I think, is emissions from travel. So that is one of the 6 points, isn't it? And it's difficult. It's really, really difficult to win the hearts and minds of our colleagues, especially, as we bounce back after COVID and people are thinking about getting out into, the world again. And colleagues, some colleagues are absolutely on board with this, but other colleagues are saying how important business travel is. The Concordat, I suppose, allows us to communicate the importance of this to our colleagues and it gives us a license, I suppose, to have a serious debate about the limits we're being prepared to put on this. And then the final point, I suppose, around emissions from travel is that, what the benchmarking report has shown us is that it's just the systems are difficult across the sector. The systems of measuring emissions from travel and getting to grips with it are difficult. And we know that at my own university, we can get certain kinds of data through our travel company, but it's very difficult to match those to individual projects or individual to funders. So what the Concordat has been is a spur to us to get better reporting about this, so we can disaggregate the different kinds of travel we're doing, and that will lead, I hope, to better decision making. So as I say, perhaps these things would have happened anyway, but the Concordat has really been a spur to them, and I think that's very important.
Thank you. Any other views?
I can mention one thing that I've
Yes.
heard of, not happening at the University of St Andrews, but one of our neighbouring universities has created a position. So somebody new who's been employed to address the Concordat. So to think about how it can be, as Matthew was saying, sort of operationalised across the university. I'm not quite sure how that role is going to date, but certainly I guess that university was able to create that new job, which I'm sure not all universities can do in the current climate. But it's great to know that that university is committed to having a position to get the Concordat working for them.
Fabulous. Thank you. We got questions coming through. Andrew, go on.
I was just going to say, I agree. It's always very hard to work out what would have happened with and without any particular intervention. But what's clearly happening is we're having more conversations about these things. This event is an example of that, and other events that are being organised are closely connected to the Concordat. So, in as much as it's providing that focus for discussion, that has to be a good and helpful thing from my point of view.
Thank you. Please send more questions through if you have them. If we can't finish them all during our panel session, we will try to respond through other ways. I think we talked about already the community of practice at the EAUC, so they will take some of these questions on. But please send them through here and we'll pick them up as far as we can. So one question is, in terms of the oversight group, how do you think we as a group can help to drive forward the improvements and the community through the Concordat? Do you have a view on this? Anybody? Simon, go on.
I clearly don't like those silences. So I guess for me, it's really the oversight group should be there to bang the drum, to highlight that awareness, to say this is something you should consider. This is something that the sector believes is important to go forward. There's been some commentary in the chat about how having a Concordat helps focus institutions on addressing something that they should be doing. But particularly at this time, there's a lot of things that we should be doing, and due to workload considerations, obviously what happens is you then focus on the important and the urgent as well, and this moves it up the urgent section as well as the important section. So I guess from the oversight group, we need to go out and we need to continue to bang the drum through events such as this.
Thank you.
I mean, Susan, maybe you're in a better position to answer this, or Joe, or others on the call. But I mean, we do need to work out, having launched the benchmark, what do we now do with the benchmark? We need to come. The whole point of having a benchmark isn't it 3 years or 5 years. We come back and we say, how has the dial moved? And that is the challenge for that's exactly what the oversight of the oversight group should be, of course, isn't it? And so we need to now, I think, and perhaps work has already gone on, and perhaps I just don't know about it, to work out what the timetable is, what the schedule is, when we will be revisiting, and what exactly will be the process for now analysing in 3 or 5 years' time how much progress has been made.
I can only answer from what I know, Matthew, but I agree. And actually, producing the landscape report was to enable us to measure whether we've made any progress. So it was almost backtracking of what we want to do in the future. I think the exact timetable for that is yet not quite decided, and that's for the group to decide anyway. But I think we need to give it a bit of time, although I recognize the urgency of affecting change in the wider system. But I think, just to answer the other aspect on this question, is, for me, the oversight group cannot just work with its members internally. It's really important that the community on whose behalf we're operating and meeting sees what we're doing and how we're supporting this. And so I totally agree, Simon, that we need to go out there and we need to be visible and we need to drive this conversation. So that's my view on this. if I throw my penny's worth in there. But yes, the timeline for updating, we haven't got yet, but that's for the group to decide, I think. Anybody else on that question? I note we have only 4 minutes left, so if it's okay, I'll move on to another. Sorry, Lydia.
Yeah, just one quick comment, and this has happened to me already. Somebody's got in touch to say what some of the challenges they're experiencing are with aligning with the Concordat. So I think also as the oversight group, we want to know what isn't working. And we'll understand some of that from our institutional perspectives, but to learn from the community what isn't working and how we can then feed that back into the Concordat or provide structures such as forums where good practice can be shared, etc. And I think we want to, as well as Simon said, going out to the community to spread the word about the Concordat, we want to hear from the community to understand what is and isn't working in relation to it.
Thank you. So we've got a question through here. How can we make the best use of the community of practice? And perhaps an opportunity to mention the plans for further oversight group events. Anybody on this? Oh dear. So I think I will come back to that in that we said questions that you have, you can direct to this community of practice at the EAOC. They will handle the questions that we haven't been able to answer. And I think, the EAOC is supporting the group overall with what we're doing, organizing the meetings, and the membership, actually, the signatories and the supporting group. So I think there is a really good link there that we need to use much more effective, I suppose, to have this conversation with that community of practice, because ultimately I think they are in many ways the drivers of this, as I can see in my own organization, to be fair. So I've got another question here. What is the timetable for funders? Sorry, Andrew, I've put that in your court, for making the Concordat compliance a clear and unambiguous condition of funding.
So
this seems to be one of the missing catalysts.
It's a very good question, and I don't think there's any answer on that. I think those of us in the smaller funders are waiting to see what the larger funders do and where they move. I think it is also worth just flagging, we need to be careful we don't accidentally exclude smaller institutions or smaller organizations that do research by introducing these rules too quickly. We've been a little bit careful. We, for instance, fund a lot of research in SMEs, and we fund it in African universities. And were we to make a mandatory condition too quickly on expecting them to behave as we would expect a research-intensive organization in the UK to behave, we might get ourselves excluding folks who we'd actually much rather were doing good research and innovation. But it's certainly something people are starting to talk about. I am not close enough to, I think, the discussions that might be going on, hopefully within UKRI, on when it starts drawing in some more significant commitments in its space.
So from a UKRI perspective, we have now our strategy refreshed, and that shows that we will have criteria in that area by latest 2029, I believe. So we have already started talking to other funders, because what we don't want to do is invent everything afresh and make the landscape even more complicated for researchers. But we're way early days, so in many ways we're leaning on the lead of others like Wellcome Trust in UK, Cancer Research UK, for example, which I think have a pretty good and quite effective solution. There's another question now here. Are there any plans to link in SparkHub once launched to use the main platform for sharing case studies and best practice? I think I have to answer that. Oh no, Simon, go on.
Sorry, I'll take this one, because there was a meeting just a couple of weeks ago where we were talking about Spark Hub as being a potential real game changer actually for the operationalization, sorry, forgive me, I struggle with that word, of a lot of this work to just say, how is it that we do these things? I mean, we have, chemistry labs, biology labs, music studios, TV studios, workshops, whatever they may be, practical, technical spaces that have their impact in all our different institutions. But, broadly, they look very similar. And so similar kind of ways, similar solutions can be applied across the piece. And so, absolutely, Spark Hub is one of those mechanisms for sharing that good practice, and one that certainly will be promoting very strongly, both within the ITSS and I suspect through the work and the environmental sustainability Concordat as well.
Fabulous. Thank you. I will not give my comment on this because actually we're already 2 or 3 minutes over. So thank you very much for answering these questions. And as I said to everybody else, we will pick up the questions and try to direct them through a different way of responding to it, ideally through the EAUC community of practice. I think the link will be put in the chat. So now I'm coming to a few presentations, and I think these are from organizations that are signatories, and they are presenting or talking about how in their work they are implementing or driving the priorities, and a reflection on the challenges, which we already heard a little bit about in this context. So we will have a Q&A session at the end of the 3 presentations. So please put your questions in the chat and we'll try to pick out as many as possible. So I think first I need to get my ducks in a row, which I should have done before. If the presenters, please, would quickly introduce themselves before they start, and then start with their presentation. And the first presentation is from the Bristol NHS Trust. So if I can hand over to the presenter for this.
Yeah, thanks, Susan.
Hi, Tommy.
Hi. Yeah, so thanks so much for the invitation to speak. Thank you to everybody for being here in attendance. So my name is Tony Timlin. I'm a research program manager and research development, research sustainability lead at North Bristol NHS Trust. I'm just going to bring my slide share, and then you don't have to stare at my face, which would be perfect. So hopefully you can see my slides now too. So I wanted to speak today to talk about the Concordat, talk about how the Concordat's helped me within the NHS to shape research sustainability activities, and to do that within the research and innovation space. So the landscape report that's been published today focuses on higher education, institutions, research organizations and funders, but it goes on to talk about how research is highly complex, difficult to define, and not restricted to just these types of organizations. And so the NHS, I think, is a key player in that space. The NHS is responsible for about 5% of the UK's total carbon footprint, and health research accounts for around 7% of the total UK research expenditure. As I was preparing the piece to speak to you today, I thought that we were still the only NHS Trust signatory of the Concordat, but actually Imperial College Healthcare, if you're here in the room, then welcome on board too. We've now got 2 NHS signatories, but watch this space, I don't think will be the last. So within the NHS, we have green plans, and that's absolutely great. They guide on sustainable change from the top down. But within my trust, I pushed for us within our research team to become a signatory, and that wasn't for recognition. It wasn't to be the first. It wasn't to be a kind of a beacon. They were the benefits that I pitched upwards because I wanted to get buy-in, but I pushed so that our research department would be able to visibly take ownership on our environmental impact and take ownership of some of those actions within the Trust Green Plan. and so that I would have the buy-in to drive sustainable quality improvement within research in our trust. So today I want to take some time to just discuss some of the things that I've done directly as a result of becoming a signatory, and then discuss a way that the Concordat can become more specific for the NHS, and how that could be a catalyst for change within the NHS. So within leadership, I think research departments need to appoint sustainability leads. The Concordat speaks to that, but these are not just tokenistic appointments. These are clinicians and researchers, particular to the NHS, who can bridge that gap between medical necessity and environmental sustainability, and our responsibility to the environment and to sustainable work. So that's something that I have done within my trust. I challenged upward for my director to create that role, and I am now the research sustainability lead. I set up an inbox so that I can be contacted, and so that people can recognize and find us quickly, and be able to bring questions and open up a flow of communication around sustainability and research. Secondly, I think we need to have sustainability written into trust research development strategies, bring the responsibility down again. If it's not a core metric of research excellence alongside patient outcomes, recruitment numbers and things like that within research in the NHS, it's going to always remain a secondary concern and something that gets pushed to the back burner, but actually it can be a driver to bring successes in all those other areas. And so again, that's something that we've done at North Bristol. It's one of our founding principles, to seek to minimize the negative environmental impact of our actions. And so that is an important mechanism then as well for me to drive change. And that's something that came about as a result of our signing of the Concordat. And then finally, we need to mandate sustainability training for research staff. I think it's really important that our PIs on a study understand the carbon impact of their study, as well as they would understand the statistical power of their results, to be able to really drive sustainable change. And so that's something that we've looked at in the trust. We've got within our learn space, environmental sustainability introduction for all staff, and then sustainable healthcare training for managers. The aim being that we can upskill the workforce around sustainability and make sure that that is always a key consideration. Something that I'm championing too within our trust, within our appraisal system, is that we have the ability to link our sustainability objectives to trust global goals, one of which is sustainability. And so this is one of my from previous years, where I set about pushing our trust to sign the Concordat, which we have now done. So I'm pleased with myself for achieving it, but I'm able to now look also at the wider metrics on the numbers of individuals who have tracked one of their appraisal targets, against the sustainability global goal. And that's an important way for me to engage people who are working in the space. In the NHS 10-year plan, we have framing around 3 big shifts. So to jump across to the next section in the Concordat, in the clinical trial life cycle, I want to look at the first of those, which is moving care from the hospital to the community. So I think we need to champion decentralized and virtual trials, and build in low carbon study methodologies across all areas of research, but travel's particularly significant there. Every time a patient doesn't have to drive into a hospital just to have a blood test or to come in to do a research questionnaire, we can really slash the carbon footprint of clinical research, and that's important, and it should be something that's considered right at the very top of the research piece. So it's an area that we're looking to do work in. Within sustainable infrastructure, the second of the big shifts is analog to digital. And when I think about that space, really, I think about digital in terms of data, and looking at infrastructure. Then we'll move on to labs as well, which has been touched on by colleagues from the panel. So we need to look at eco-conscious data management, and I think sustainable technology needs to become fundamental to the brief. It should be the norm, and that includes within procurement, prioritizing sustainable purchasing too. And that does happen within the green plan space, but the Concordat enables me to bring that down into our department, and again take on the responsibility of prioritizing those sustainable decision making at a departmental level. In the labs, I hear so many people talking about challenging upwards to change their freezer temperatures and hitting a brick wall. So again, this is something where the Concordat will give some mandate to that, but I think within the NHS we need to push for national guidance and have a mandated change from the top down, so that the easy wins like freezer temperature can become standard. But more than that, I think we need to incorporate sustainable standardization across the board, so that becomes the driving mechanism, sustainability as standard. And then I just want to move on as well to data and governance. We need to change behavior, and the Concordat, as we've already heard from colleagues on the panel, is a great way to change behavior. There are lots of teams working on standardization of carbon footprinting clinical trials, which is great. We need to be able to say this trial cost X amount of pounds, this trial produced Y tons of CO2, and also this trial gave Z benefit to patients. We need full triple bottom line assessment. But I would argue that even more important than that, we need to be able to do those things before the fact. And colleagues mentioned about tooling that's being produced at the moment in Exeter, the TRACE project, which is looking at carbon footprinting at the point of or pre-funding application. We want to be able to say this trial will produce Y tons CO2, but here's what we can do about it right now in the design phase to reduce those Y tons CO2. We can maintain patient benefit at the same time. We can add additional benefit for future generations by doing the sustainable and environmental thing, and we can probably end up saving pounds in the long term. So that is important, and I think that's really critical. And moving on from that, we need to integrate environmental impact assessment into the funding application process and into research ethics. I think we need to be asking researchers not just to clarify their risk to patients in the NHS and to weigh up cost benefit. We need to ask them to justify their environmental cost on their methodology as well. And so that's something that I've looked at within our trust. We have a business cases sustainable impact assessment for high value business cases, where a series of questions are asked on different areas of environmental and sustainable impact. And if you answer yes, then you jump to another tab and work towards carbon footprinting of the business case. So I've adapted that methodology and lifted those screening questions into our funding applications, where we host research funding that is drawn from our charity funding pools or from our RCF allocations, which is our research capability funding. So it's kind of drop down funding that comes to the trust. So we have that mandated now, and it's not scored, and we don't take it to use in decision making. But in stage one, I will be able to get a very broad brush approach from the researcher, just to think that they've considered the environmental impact across those key areas. And I can screen that information before they submit for stage 2 and come back and ask questions of them to look at how things might be able to change and make small wins at that point in time. So that's another important thing that I've been able to do as a result of the Concordat. And that brings me back to the people in this room. For the Concordat to work in the NHS, we need cross-sector collaboration. We've spoken about it, and a lot of the speakers have mentioned it. But the report makes clear that there are significant opportunities for organisations to share in specific ambitions. And we need formal networks to share best practice between higher education and the health service. So the Concordat COP's a really great place to foster those collaborations. Lydia and Simon spoke about that earlier. The Concordat is our roadmap for R&I. And I think that it would be great to see specific appendices for subsectors within R&I, particularly the NHS, so that the Concordat engages more strongly those communities. There are so many higher education organisations here on the signatory network, but there's just our 2 NHS trusts. I'd like to see this whole logo space shift blue as more and more NHS trusts come on board. At a trust level, we have green plans as a roadmap to net zero, but the Concordat shifts the ownership of responsibility into the research departments, and it can make sustainable research the primary strategic concern. And for that reason, I'll continue to advocate for other trusts to sign. So watch this space, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I know the NHS colleagues are actually ahead in many areas, procurement, for example. So well done. Thank you. Our next presentation comes from King's College. Marcelo, is that you?
Yes, that's me. Thank you, Susan. Let me share my screen here. Can you see my screen? Yeah, I suppose. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Marcelo. I am the lead sustainable research at King's Operations and Infrastructure, but also helping researchers to generate green credentials for the proposals and support our amazing community of champions and follow best practices for our labs. And thank you for the opportunity to share our experience of what has been a robust, I will say, but a sometimes controversial update for our travel policy. And these discussions actually began well before we became signatories of the Concordat in 2023. And the policy was approved in October 2024, with Kings formally becoming signatory in December 2024. You can see here on the left the core objectives of our update policy. The elements that I highlight in yellow are those that require the greatest emphasis, the most extensive discussion, and the most sustained effort to deliver, right? The update of the Sustainable Travel Policy sets a clear, measurable target of 30% reduction in business travel emission by 2025 and 50% reduction by 2013, that it was benchmarked against 2018-2019 levels. And there was a key focus in the reduction of air travel, which accounts for over 90% of our total business travel emission. One thing to highlight here is that we recognize early on that achievement, these targets will require a meaningful shift in behavior. And as a result, the policy was introduced in phases and shaped through extensive consultation, engagement, and ongoing support. How we implement this policy? Well, it includes a communication campaign and mainly for restrictions on mainland UK flights, except in exceptional circumstances, and the introduction of a streamlined book process. And actually that was good for the institution because it required a change in how we work. We moved from manual approvals to a clear process that includes health and safety, insurance, and yes, and the best way to make low carbon travel. What we are planning to, get in a phase 2, which is for now hold, is to introduce a mandatory train travel for destination reachable within 5 hours in a potential internal flight levy. Places like Paris and Brussels, which are easy to reach by Eurostar. I had experience with the Eurostar, and it's a really, really nice way to travel. Everybody will experience more or less the same. But it's really good as long as the cost can be covered. So that's I think is the main barrier that we have for people living in London at the moment. What changed to facilitate the sustainable travel bookings? Well, I have to say that the process was piloted on selected departments before to rolling out university-wide in October 2024, but we came up with a new simplified booking process via Helix form. You can see below will prompt consideration of sustainable travel options first, then global motility with exemptions, health and safety, and allows streamlined approvals and easy access to low carbon options in all this process. To get to that, we have to get a really wide-ranging communications of campaign. And, we have to update our web resources. There were very interesting panel debates on sustainable travel, particularly with the researchers. And we have also offering carbon literacy training to increase awareness and sustainability models for staff and students. And I think this is very, very helpful. And at this moment, King's was became a signatory of the Concordat that helps to socialize, and I would say cement the commitment of the researchers. The impact after 1 year, I think, is quite positive. UK mainland flight fell by 50% at King's. And a particular note is for flights taken to Newquay and King's. Newquay, we have the service central center for, we have more than 150 staff that provide IT support to King's students and staff, and it's also home to King's State and Facility Service Desk. So it's not in London particularly, but we are happy to know that we can reduce the flights by 80%. So that means that we can still fly by travel by train to these places and the King's Service Center, which is quite amazing. So what are the key, lessons and the impact and the benefit for our institutions? So what we learned, and I think this is a lesson for any institution that wants to start something like this, is that we need early and sustained engagement with the staff and the students. Even when you have the policy in place, you have to continue this sustained engagement of the people, and it's critical to achieve a really good change. But also, even though the shift was a particular thing, which is stop flights in the mainland, it needs a system-wide change. So we have to redesign the travel approval and booking systems. And yes, so we face this first phase was quite critical, but I think a second phase to implement a more wider use of low carbon emissions travel, it's going to be in principle easier. There is in terms of progress and impact, the travel data shows a clear reductions in UK air travel, and hopefully we're going to have more coming. There is a real and measurable progress. So we now know exactly what's going on, how people travel at King's, because we have this process. And of course, there are benefits. We improve the process and data quality, and we have stronger staff and students engagement. This is an area that triggers a lot of engagements in a good or in a bad way, but it triggers a really engagement of the people. And at this point, I think I have to highlight that this was a policy design implementation led by Rosie Smith, a program director for King's Climate Sustainability Team, and Judith Corostos, the travel manager, that they really did the masterwork on that to happen. So in the last slide, I would like to just have a couple of thoughts and a little bit in line what the panel discussed already. But I would say the main thing that the Concordat held for us is to reduce the frictions with the researchers. And there are a couple of thoughts around that. One is that sustainable travel options become sort of mandate, reducing the perception of unilateral restrictions, align King's policy with UK expectations, but also shift the responsibilities upwards. So PIs are supported by funders and institutions to decide low carbon where possible for new projects, conference, and for the whole laboratory as well. And it's also the idea to legitimize virtual and hybrid, right? Conferences and meetings, in a way, remove the reputational concerns around online participations. It's also, in the same way, supports alternative collaboration models. So we are, in a way, encouraging local networks instead of going for international travelers, instead of going for, networks that they are more focused into, groups that can be in Asia or in United States. We are trying now to be more Europeans, if you want to say. And also, I would say, normalize the culture change across the sector. So the researchers, they are not, or they will not feel outliers for traveling less, just because. And for the future and more for the discussions as well is some suggest areas to strengthen the UKRI Concordat. I think maybe we can provide in the Concordat more clear guidance on travel, how to use local or alternatives. This is not at the moment. Address the cost barriers because, lower carbon, at least in the UK, it comes with a higher cost for the travel options. And, introduce this as a discussion that is already done, introduce monitoring and reporting and share the metrics and transparency to, track the progress and support sector-wide learning. So this is all about what I wanted to share today. And yeah, of course, happy to take questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcelo. And thank you for picking up probably one of the most thorny issues, certainly in the conversation with the wider research community. And I know from UKRI and MRC is a similar issue. I would like to point out it's not the UKRI Concordat. This Concordat is community owned.
Yeah, I have to change it. Yeah.
Just to make sure that it's not misunderstood. But yes, very flattering. Thank you. So we come now to our third presentation, which comes from the Bristol Medical School, and that is Ava.
Great.
Did I say that correctly?
It's Ava, actually. That's fine.
Oh, Ava.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, hopefully that looks okay. So my project, I'm based at the University of Bristol. I'm a qualitative researcher. I don't actually have an official sustainability role, but I was lucky enough to get some funding to do a small project on sustainability and research with a team of researchers based here. I believe Anna is on the call today. So I'm just going to zoom through the project I did, which was looking at researchers across the whole of the university, so all different departments and schools, and looking at their awareness of the environmental impact of research and of policies around that, including the Concordat, and looking at some of the barriers and drivers. So yeah, a bit of kind of scoping to see what the situation is here at University of Bristol. We used a survey and focus group, so it was anyone who was research active, so staff and postgraduate students. We did this last year and we conducted 5 focus groups. We had quite a range of different schools, so 28 different schools taking part in the survey and 21 different schools in the focus group, so quite a range of different methods and disciplines and subject areas. And the focus groups were all done online. And then last summer, we had a dissemination workshop event with various different stakeholders attending to discuss some of the findings. So I'm just going to zoom through some of the kind of findings that I thought would be most interesting. So as I'm sure you'd all expect, the most researchers were worried about climate change, 72% very worried or extremely worried, and 89% believing that individual actions can create change. Over half, 57%, said it was very important to consider sustainability when they're doing their research, and almost no one said it wasn't at all. And then about 50% of participants said that they always incorporate sustainability into their research, but it wasn't a high priority, and most hadn't had any training on this. Some of the barriers reported in the survey were lack of knowledge and lack of initiatives and lack of familiarity with the policies. But I'll go into more detail with the qualitative research. And there was a general feeling of a lack of support from the university around this area. This just highlights one of the questions, which was asking participants around particular initiatives, including the Concordat, and whether they were familiar with them. Sorry, it's probably a bit hard to see, but the pink is not at all familiar. So you can see the majority weren't familiar with these initiatives, only a very small minority for most of the initiatives that we named there. This graph just shows some different actions that we highlighted that people could take potentially, and whether they were willing to take them. basically the conclusion here is that it varied depending on the action, as you'd expect, but quite high proportions of people saying that they weren't willing to change their behaviour, basically, for different actions. But yeah, there's a lot more detail in there, obviously, depending what the action was. So just going on to some of the qualitative findings. So one of the headline themes, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, sustainability is complex, but that came through really strongly in the focus group results. So I've got some quotes. I'm hoping they're going to pop up there. Yeah. So there was a lot of talk around the kind of intersecting systems, and that systemic problems are kind of intrinsically linked to sustainability. And the main example being the public transport system, similar to the presentation we've just heard, but also the academic system, so workload, funding deadlines, short-term contracts, all of those issues. And then another key theme was around the career of a researcher. So there was a concern that taking sustainable actions might disproportionately affect early career researchers who are trying to build their networks and, you know, fly to meet people and go to conferences and things. And then there was a really strong theme around research culture and habits, so connecting up sustainability changes with the kind of metrics of research, which maybe need to be revisited and thought about in this context. So, for example, going to in-person conferences, publishing, citing, funder requirements, all of those things. Also, promotion and progression criteria, which were seen as not particularly understanding of sustainability changes. And then some of the more practical barriers were workload. So obviously sustainability not being included in people's workload or their job descriptions, but also just the general kind of overburden on researchers and whether they had the capacity to take on sustainability as well. And then there were some concerns around potentially sustainable actions compromising research quality or in integrity or inclusion and diversity, which is really important. And finally, the systems, as I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, a lot of the systems, like we just heard about the travel booking system, was a big one that people complained about, that it made things really, really tricky, and procurement as well. Just a few more highlights from the focus group data. So there was a clear lack of knowledge, information, and communication. Even within the university, it was really interesting to see people swapping tips within the focus groups from different departments, saying, "Oh, I didn't know you did that, and we did that." And so, kind of linking to what we've been talking about here about sharing best practice and information, which wasn't really happening and was really thought of a good idea. We talked a bit about drivers and mandatory processes and whether they would drive behaviour. Not really much consensus on that, but some suggestions around kind of the ethics form or funding procedures to try and drive behaviour. There was a lot of talk about responsibility. Whose role is this? So we need talking about senior scientists and researchers to kind of lead by example. Again, that thing of not impacting early career researchers and the people who are more established, maybe taking responsibility. And there was a strong theme around the role of the university and that they should be doing more. So it's quite a long quote there, but there was a lot of emotion around this issue that the university claimed to be doing things around sustainability, but in terms of sustainable research, the researchers weren't convinced that they were doing enough. And we talked a bit about training and whether this would be useful or not, whether it would become a tick box exercise, and that it really needs to be useful and integrated in. So just to conclude, these are some of the implications for the university, which I've kind of connected up to some of the Concordat. I mean, they really strongly reflect a lot of the Concordat principles. So that's great to have that as a backing when we're taking this to the executive board, and have that, you know, we've got the data from the researchers and the staff, and we've also got the themes from the Concordat to support that. So yeah, it's around taking it seriously, being a leader, supporting open discussions and making sure people feel able to speak out about these issues, and then changing systems, processes and structures to incorporate sustainability, potentially providing training, and then connecting people and sharing information and having structures to do that. We're currently writing well, I'm not involved in it, but the university is writing a university climate action plan. So this data has all been fed into that, which I understand has been quite useful to provide some backing and support for what we're going to request in that plan. and just some kind of wider implications. Issues around research culture and values, kind of do we need to change the way what we value and what we reward and the metrics that we use to emphasize sustainability and address some of those systemic issues. Challenging and disrupting, influencing the leaders. That was a really strong feeling from the focus groups that, we can't just kind of tweak things. We need to really challenge some of the processes higher up. And issues around workload and job precarity. How do we enable researchers to take this on board? Really interesting to hear about the various roles that have been implemented in other places this morning around that. And as I said, not trying to make sure we're not impacting early career researchers. Just to mention some of the next steps we're now doing. So we've published an internal report, which has gone to the executive board of the university, and they're mulling it over now and waiting to hear back from them. But as I said, it has been incorporated into the climate action plan, which is great. We're hoping to publish this as a paper. Just to mention, Paula Williamson at Liverpool has done a similar study to mine. She wasn't able to attend today, but I just wanted to flag that she also has some similar data. I think a lot of the themes were quite similar from her university, and I'd love to hear from anyone else who's done similar work like this. It'd be great to hear if it echoes with anyone. And just to mention a couple of other projects that we've done, one around integrating into the ethics application, and one looking at some of the key themes here, a GW4 funded project to develop community partnerships. And we're currently working on a pilot to integrate sustainability into our internal funding applications. So thank you to the Cabot Institute for funding the project and everyone who took part. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Ava. So clearly, travel features everywhere quite highly, and I know that from my own experience in consulting for our strategy, it is something that is important to academic, work. But I think it's a question of how to do it right. And so no surprise that there's a question coming for Marcelo. You mentioned possible cost levies for any remaining UK flights. Can you say more, and how do you envisage this to happen?
Well, as I said, I wasn't involved in this part of the phase, but what I can say, this is something that we can work together with the funders as well. I mean, I don't think it won't be really good, the institution alone, to jump into this park, particularly for the researchers, that is so personal for them. So I would say if the funding agencies can help us and we can create a sort of awareness about the lower carbon flights and the way to reduce, but not like an obligation, but just as a suggestion, how to revise the grants, the applications, and how to make these all travel emissions in a lower carbon efficiency. I think that would be great. From the levies, I can check with the rest of the people that is working together and tell you later what is going on. But I think it's something that we should work together with the funding agencies as well.
There was a little add-on, Marcelo, sorry. Is there any extension to the policy under consideration, such as overnight accommodation being added to train travel, and how you take EDI issues into account?
Yeah, this is natural. I mean, if you consider train travel, you can end up into having overnight somewhere else. People is not happy. I mean, particularly if you have a family, you don't want to have an overnight somewhere else. But it's what is coming, and of course these are considered completely during the process. And what else was?
I think there was this, for example, the way I understand it is that when you travel by train, you might not be able to get back,
Exactly.
so on the same day, so you might have to add the accommodation to it.
Exactly. This is natural. I mean, this is happening, and it is considered in the process, right? And EDI, it's also, this is a part of the process where you can say, okay, I have any condition that I need to travel by plane. and it's of course accepted. So it's not that it's restricted for everybody. So the ADI is considered in the process.
Okay, fabulous. So one very quick question to all of the presenters. Really fast answer if you can. Staff and student training, for example, carbon literacy training is a common theme across the three presentations. So the question is whether this training was developed and delivered in-house or externally, and whether this can be in any way accredited, and if so, by whom? Long question. Tony, let's start with you. Very quick.
Yeah, go ahead. So I think, yeah, it can be delivered in-house. Carbon literacy project's a great example of that, where somebody can become accredited to deliver the training and then roll it out. I think where there are close-knit organizations, they can ally and deliver that together. So we're looking at regionally strategic operational work in the NHS at the moment and working in partnership with other kind of sister sites. One of my core projects is the Cancer Vaccine Launchpad, and that is very much about bringing patients, breaking the physical borders around where patients live. And I think the same can be true of training. You don't need to think about it as doing it for your team. Just think about doing it for your region or your wider area, and then share the space. But yeah, I think training is really critical, and upskilling people around sustainability, definitely.
Fabulous.
I'm gonna
Ava.
okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go on.
I'm going to be
Marcelo.
quick. I think that for a higher education institution, training should be mandatory. I mean, we should think about having this training, and in our case at King's, we are considering to have our own training and support the training for students and for staff both.
Fabulous. Ava.
Yeah, I'm not personally involved in doing any training, but yeah, the findings from my project suggested that again, mandatory training would be useful. So yeah.
Fabulous. Now we're running out of time. Thank you all very much for putting up with my substandard chairing. But I think the Concordat, as it has shown, has been a step forward, quite a huge step forward for the community as a whole, to reduce the detrimental impact. And as we have heard, it's produced leverage in organizations and communities to begin real activities and push for the things that need to be done. And I think the landscape report will now allow us to really measure that this is not a peak in activities and then everything drops down below the radar. So we need to make sure that the landscape report and the measuring and monitoring will help us to maintain the momentum that the Concordat created. I know the landscape report is now available on the Wellcome Trust website. And thank you again, the Wellcome Trust, for hosting the Concordat as a whole and giving the wider community the ability to read up and check on who's there and what we're doing. The webinar has been really interesting and highlighted quite a few important aspects that the oversight group will want to engage with in the future. And I think that should form maybe one of the next meeting agenda items that we talk about how we're going to address that. I would like to thank the EAUC, who's actually supporting the oversight board group. I keep saying board, it's a group, and the onboarding for signatories and supporters and generally helping with the admin and the work there. So Jenny has helped setting up this meeting. So thank you very much. And both Joe and Kerry Garford from Wellcome Trust, the latter is from Wellcome Trust, Joe is UKRI, for the work that they've put in to make this organized, finding fantastic speakers, corralling panel members and myself into the right direction. So thank you so much for this. And of course, the audience for joining us and discussing this and putting forward questions. So we will think about how we do things next, and it will definitely be communicated widely. So watch this space. And I thank you for this and goodbye. Thank you.